The city woke like a drumbeat at sunrise, golden light spilling over streets of wealth and streets of want. On one side, mansions rose tall and proud, their walls painted in colors that shouted power, their gates polished as if to keep the world out. Inside, tables groaned under mountains of food, laughter echoed in grand halls, and servants moved like shadows in the glow of chandeliers. Yet just beyond the walls, narrow dusty paths wound through small, fragile houses where roofs sagged and children played with bare feet in the dirt. Hunger whispered through these streets, and hope often slept on empty stomachs, for the world had drawn a line between abundance and need. When rivers flow side by side but never meet, the elders said, one brings life, the other sorrow, and in this city that truth walked in every corner. Amid the golden towers lived a man shaped by struggle, a billionaire who had known the heat of sun on bare skin and the ache of empty hands. He had built himself from nothing, brick by brick, coin by coin, believing that life owed no one favors. I made myself, he often said, voice steady as a drum. The world gives nothing to the weak. To him, success was earned, never given, and discipline was the only currency that mattered. Every decision, every order, every movement of the household was a reflection of that belief. Wealth had hardened him as the sun hardens clay, leaving little space for softness, little room for mercy. Those who worked under him feared his presence, though they respected the power he held. His footsteps silenced chatter, his gaze weighed heavier than any punishment, and his words cut sharper than knives. If you are suffering, he would say, it is because you have not worked hard enough. Compassion, in his mind, was a weakness, and weakness was not permitted in his world. Yet inside the walls of that grand mansion, a quiet figure moved unnoticed, a woman from a distant village, whose life had been shaped by patience and respect for the rhythms of the earth. She bowed slightly as she walked, not out of fear, but from the humility her upbringing had taught her. She spoke softly, only when necessary, and her hands never rested, carrying the weight of a family she had left behind. Before the sun had fully risen, she worked tirelessly, sweeping floors, preparing food, polishing silver, all without complaint. Her eyes often carried a quiet weariness, the kind only those who bear burdens for others understand. Every coin she earned went back to her family, who waited in a small village, trusting her to provide. She did not speak of her hunger or her fatigue, she simply endured. Her silence was strength, her obedience a shield, and her sacrifice invisible to most. In the mansion, food overflowed, some left to rot, some tossed aside without thought. Luxury shone in every corner, yet the mansion had little mercy. The rules were clear, sharp, and unbending. Every task had its place, every mistake a consequence, and the master's word was law. Discipline keeps a man alive, he said. Kindness only weakens him. And so, in this house of plenty, where abundance ruled and mercy slept, she labored quietly, carrying her unseen burdens with the strength of one who has learned that survival often demands both silence and courage. A small disturbance in the grand mansion echoed louder than anyone could have imagined. One evening, as the servants moved through polished floors and shining halls, a careful count revealed food missing from the kitchen. The smell of cooked meals lingered in the air, yet some plates were lighter than they should have been. Whispers began to circulate, eyes darting toward the quiet woman from the village, who had moved silently among the bustle all day. Her hands were clean, her face calm, but a shadow of worry brushed across her features as suspicion grew. The billionaire's voice cut through the murmurs like a drum announcing war. "Who took from my kitchen?" His gaze fell upon her, sharp and unyielding. She met his eyes, not with fear, but with a quiet strength that seemed to challenge him. "It was me," she said softly, her voice barely above the hum of the chandeliers. He stepped closer, demanding an explanation, but she remained silent. "Why?" he asked, but she only shook her head slightly, her lips pressed together. The room held its breath. The mystery of her act hung between them, heavier than the silver chandeliers above. Without a second thought, the billionaire passed judgment. "You are no longer needed here," he declared, his words final as a king's decree. Pride, authority, and a rigid sense of justice left no room for mercy. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the law she could not change. There were no pleas, no arguments, only the weight of his decision settling over the polished floors. She gathered her small bag, the few belongings she carried, and turned toward the door. Each step was quiet but purposeful, her back straight, her head held high. Though her future was uncertain, her dignity remained intact. The echo of her footsteps faded slowly, leaving the billionaire alone with a house filled with wealth and yet strangely empty of meaning. He stood in the great hall, watching the door close, and felt a stirring in his chest he had not expected. Confidence in his actions wavered as a strange unrest settled in his heart. Her silence pressed against him like a warning whispered by ancestors, a quiet voice demanding reflection that he could not shake. That night, sleep would not come. In the stillness of his luxurious bedroom, the walls lined with gold and velvet, his mind replayed her calm acceptance. He had acted with certainty, believing he had done right, yet every shadow seemed heavier, every silence louder. The house was filled with riches, but in the quiet of his room, conscience echoed louder than the clatter of wealth. The night stretched on, restless and unforgiving, as the heart of a man who believed himself just began to stir with doubt. He could not stop seeing her face. In the quiet of his study, the memory played again and again, as if the walls themselves whispered it back to him. He had expected pleading, tears, excuses, even fear, but she had stood before him with calm eyes and silent acceptance. That silence pressed against him, heavier than any argument or confession could have. It unsettled him in ways he did not want to admit. "How can one woman hold such strength without words?" he muttered under his breath, pacing the room, his polished shoes echoing against marble floors. He had thought he knew power. He had thought fear was enough to bend others. Yet her quiet dignity planted seeds of doubt deep within him. "I expected begging," he whispered, "a cry for mercy, and instead she gave me nothing but respect." He shook his head, trying to dismiss the unease, but it clung like a shadow he could not shake. The pride he carried, a pride built on years of struggle and wealth, felt suddenly fragile before her simple, unyielding stance. His mind wandered back to days long buried beneath the walls of his mansions. He remembered hunger that gnawed like a wild animal, mornings when his stomach ached and his hands were empty. He had risen from that suffering, carving wealth and success from the world with sweat and unrelenting effort. But the memory was distant, almost foreign. He had taught himself to forget the taste of want, to replace it with the cold certainty of order and wealth. Yet now, as he stared into the past, he felt a flicker of something long suppressed, compassion, shame, perhaps a faint recognition of injustice. He scolded himself. "Emotions are for the weak," he murmured, gripping the edge of his desk. Compassion, he believed, led to failure. Every hardship overcome, every empire built, had demanded that he lock away the soft parts of his heart. And yet, the sight of her courage, her silent bravery, tested that belief. His mindset, once a shield, now felt like a blindfold, keeping him from seeing a truth he could no longer ignore. Curiosity gnawed at him, stronger than pride. Who was this woman, and why had she risked everything? Questions rose like embers that would not die. Without a word to anyone, he decided he must follow her, to see the truth with his own eyes. If there was deception, he would uncover it. If there was injustice, he would witness it firsthand. The next morning, he left the safety of marble streets and towering walls behind. The smooth roads of his world gave way to cracked paths, uneven and dusty. Houses leaned against one another like tired old friends, and the air carried the scent of earth and struggle. Each step further from the city felt like stepping into a story he had never been allowed to read, a life he had chosen to ignore. At the outskirts, the signs of survival were everywhere. Small homes huddled together, roofs patched with scraps, children running barefoot, their laughter mingling with cries of hunger. Women carried water in clay pots, balancing burdens heavier than the wealth he had amassed. Here, abundance meant nothing. Every day was a fight to endure. The stark contrast forced him to see what he had long ignored, wealth that dazzled in the city, yet could not touch the lives of those who truly needed it. And for the first time, he began to understand that power without understanding was a kind of blindness, and that judgment without compassion could never be true justice. He followed silently, keeping to the shadows as she walked through the narrow streets. The grandeur of the city faded behind him, replaced by walls patched with tin, clay, and hope. When she reached a small, worn-out house, he paused. The door, crooked and faded, seemed to carry the stories of years of struggle. Every crack whispered of resilience, every peeling paint told of quiet suffering endured with dignity. This was a world he had never sought to see, hidden behind the facades of wealth he had built. As she stepped inside, a sudden flurry of movement caught his eye. Children, their bodies thin, their faces bright with hunger and hope, ran toward her. Their small hands clutched at her skirts, their laughter mingled with coughs and cries. "Mama!" one cried, a voice so raw with longing it pierced his pride. He watched as the truth unfolded. These were not spoiled children demanding indulgence, but innocent lives craving sustenance. The stolen food now made sense. Her actions were threads in a tapestry of survival. At the far corner, an elderly woman lay on a thin mat, her skin wrinkled and frail, eyes half closed. Her breath came in quiet, uneven waves, as if she teetered between life and the next world. She did not stir as the children climbed over her, yet her presence weighed on him heavily. She embodied tradition, family duty, and the relentless weight of generations depending on one caregiver. He felt shame for ever doubting the maid's intentions. The maid opened the small bag she had carried from the mansion. Carefully, with deliberate hands, she divided the food into portions for each child and the elder. Each piece was measured with precision, as if she were balancing the fragile scales of survival itself. He saw the love in every motion, the silent vow that no one would go hungry under her care. The stolen food had become shared survival, a bridge between desperation and hope. She paused only after the last portion was laid before the children, never once tasting the food herself. Hunger pressed against her own body, yet she remained steadfast, ensuring each mouth was fed before her own. It was a quiet, unspoken ritual, a display of selflessness stronger than any declaration of loyalty or law. He could not look away. It was as if he was witnessing truth itself standing before him. The reality of her life struck him like a sudden storm. This was not theft born of greed, but acts carved from necessity and love. His notions of justice, so rigid and unbending, began to crumble. All his rules, all his punishments, seemed shallow in the face of this human truth. He realized that right and wrong were not always written in law, they were written in the hearts of those who give all they have for others. He saw the burden she carried, alone, without complaint. Every worry, every sleepless night, every pang of hunger belonged to her. She was the only provider, the sole defender of lives that depended entirely on her courage and sacrifice. Her struggle was silent, yet thunderous in its impact, a story he had never imagined existed just beyond his golden walls. And then he saw it clearly. Her wages, however hard-earned, had never been enough. The society that surrounded them, with its gleaming towers and piles of wealth, had left her family exposed to hunger and illness. Her stolen food was not an act of sin but a challenge to the injustice that surrounded her. For the first time, he truly understood how hollow his definition of right and wrong had been, how easy it was to punish without seeing, to judge without knowing, and to enforce laws that could not reach the heart of humanity. The maid moved with quiet resolve, her small hands clutching the precious food as if it were gold mined from the heart of the earth. Each step back into the humble home was a decision carved from love and desperation. She could lose her job, face the wrath of a man who prized order above all, yet the rumble of her children's stomachs and the wheeze of the old woman demanded her courage. "I must feed them," she whispered softly, voice trembling but firm, "even if it costs me everything." In that moment, her choice became a beacon of quiet heroism, a defiance born not of rebellion but of duty to life itself. From the shadows, he watched, chest tightening with a strange mixture of anger and awe. The billionaire's eyes, so used to seeing numbers, reports, and walls of wealth, now beheld flesh and bone, trembling with hunger and hope. Poverty was no longer distant. It breathed, it pleaded, it lived before him. He saw children with sunken cheeks and bright, pleading eyes, not statistics. Each face carried a story of struggle, each gaze a silent cry he could not ignore. The faces of the children blurred into the fragile body of the elder, her frail hand reaching for the food as though it were a lifeline thrown across the chasm of suffering. Each motion of the maid, every careful portion laid on the mat, weighed on him more than any ledger ever could. Numbers turned into faces, and faces into pain. He felt it in his bones, a heavy, unshakable truth pressing down on the walls of his certainty. He remembered his own journey, the years when hunger clawed at him, when the warmth of a full belly was a rare treasure. Yet he had buried those memories beneath walls of marble and towers of wealth. Now, standing unseen at the threshold, he felt his control cracking. The rigid scaffolding of discipline, authority, and pride began to splinter. Could he have been wrong? Could justice demand mercy where law demanded punishment? Doubt seeped into his heart, softening it in ways he had long denied. The maid, unaware of his gaze, became a symbol of quiet endurance. She embodied the strength of the unseen, the courage of those who bear burdens without complaint. And he, for all his power and gold, became a figure of pride clouded by ignorance, blind to lives beyond his gates. Her strength illuminated his blindness, showing him the limits of authority without understanding. Around her, the small family moved with a rhythm shaped by love, sharing the little they had, supporting one another in ways the city had forgotten. Their unity, born from hardship, mirrored the spirit of the villages he had left behind, a communal bond that kept life alive when wealth alone could not. His own world, vast and luxurious, seemed suddenly cold and empty, disconnected from the pulse of human need it was meant to serve. The law of his mansion, the rules he wielded like a sword, felt hollow in contrast to the compassion unfolding before him. The conflict between authority and humanity was no longer an abstraction. It was a living, breathing lesson. Justice without mercy, he realized, is incomplete, a kingdom of walls that cannot hold the hearts it claims to govern. In the quiet of that small, broken home, the billionaire saw for the first time the true measure of power, responsibility, and humanity, and his heart began to change. The billionaire stood at the edge of the alley, the dust rising around his polished shoes like whispers of judgment. Pride and truth warred within him, each tugging at the edges of his mind. "I did right, yet something gnaws," he muttered under his breath, voice heavy with the weight of unspoken questions. The memory of the maid's calm, unshaken gaze haunted him more fiercely than any plea or protest could have. He had expected fear, excuses, tears, but what he had seen instead was dignity, resilience, and a love stronger than hunger itself. Images of his past returned unbidden, the nights when his stomach ached and his hands were empty, when hope itself felt like a luxury. The faces of children he once knew, the cracked floors of homes that offered nothing but survival, all whispered to him now, demanding recognition. Was I so different? He wondered aloud, gripping the edges of his coat as if holding on to the man he thought he was. Yet, he could not admit the similarity, for his ego rose like a wall, insisting he remain untouchable, unmoved, unsoftened by emotion. Inside, the storm raged. His conscience pressed forward, a relentless drum calling for acknowledgement, while his pride dug trenches, insisting he maintain control, that vulnerability was weakness. Each heartbeat felt like a verdict passed in silence. He paced, weighed, reconsidered, and doubted, the tension within him growing like a gathering thundercloud. Every step seemed heavier, every breath laden with questions he had long avoided. This was no ordinary conflict. It was a reckoning, the kind spoken of in village tales where the powerful man is humbled by truth, and the meek reveal the strength of the human heart. By dawn, he returned, no longer hidden in shadow or comfort, his figure moving with deliberate caution toward the worn, small home. The streets, once familiar, now bore the weight of guilt upon him. Each uneven stone and dusty path mirrored the heaviness pressing upon his conscience. As he approached, he realized that this journey was no longer about observation or suspicion, it was a pilgrimage of acknowledgement. Pride had to step aside, for truth had arrived, and with it, the seeds of transformation began to stir in his heart. The sun had climbed higher, casting golden light across the cracked walls and worn clay of the maid's humble home. He approached not with the arrogance of a master, nor with the certainty of wealth behind him, but as a man whose heart carried the weight of questions it could no longer ignore. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured, for he had left behind the safety of marble and glass to confront a truth that could not be bought. She stood at the doorway, calm and composed. Her eyes met his without fear, a quiet force that seemed to fill the small courtyard. The air between them was thick with tension, carrying words neither dared speak, yet each glance spoke volumes. He saw the lines of endurance etched into her face, the way her hands rested lightly, not trembling, and felt the silent power of dignity born from years of struggle. I did not know," he murmured finally, voice rough with emotion. "I thought I was right. I thought—" His words faltered, the authority he once wielded now trembling against the reality before him. She did not respond, only observed, and in her silence lay the courage he could not command. His eyes roamed the small home, patchwork walls, a modest stove, children quietly moving in and out of shadows. He saw life lived with little, yet full of care and survival, a truth that had always been invisible in the glittering mansions he called home. The wealth that once defined him now seemed a barrier, a wall built around a heart that had forgotten compassion. He swallowed hard, the memory of firing her returning like a bitter taste. How had he believed it was justice to cast her out? The pride that had once justified his actions now felt fragile, hollow, almost shameful. What he had called right now seemed cruel, a misjudgment born from distance and ignorance. For the first time, he felt the sharp ache of understanding. Power and money alone could not measure a life, and rules without compassion could never create justice. In her silence, in the dignity of her bearing, he glimpsed a mirror to what true strength meant. And in that reflection, his pride began to crack, and a new reckoning took root within him.